This bathhouse is part of my Greek and Roman themed town, though probably much more inspired by the Roman bathhouses, which were a bit more complex and had many more different rooms, both hot and cold. This build was also a great opportunity for me to test out floor patterns and wall patterns with the small beams of ashwood and grafton that I showcased in my previous video. First, I'm going to show you the whole build. Then I'm going to show you some tips and tricks and curiosities that I used while building. So first, let me show you around. The entrance was usually secluded on the side of the building, giving access to a room where the citizens would meet up and be greeted by what would have been the staff back in the day. I kept this area relatively small and added some tables for the custodian. The wall is decorated with wavy patterns made of grafton and ashwood beams, which I will come back to a bit later in the video. After checking in with the custodian, visitors are able to store their items and clothes in small lockers. They can also use the latrines on the side of the entrance before going into the different bath areas. These were super fun to build, and you can actually see some water effects when looking down into the latrines. When heading into the main bath, the visitor is greeted by a large open pool, with stairs leading into it, and mosaic patterns of sea creatures on the floor that I did much like I did the owl in my previous video, but on the water. Initially, this was supposed to be a brittle star, and some fish around it, although you can argue it looks a bit like an octopus. So visitors can enjoy the cold waters, have a chat while splashing around, and the pool is not very deep, allowing for some walking, so I would not recommend cannonballing into it. Some side rooms for lounging and sitting around. One room has some wavy patterns, a bit different from the entrance ones, some benches and some decorative pots. Another room at the back with larger beds and rugs over them, where visitors can relax as well. The wall here has a fish pattern, where I actually used regular wood beams with some damage on them to make them look greener. Then on the other side of the pool there are two different thematic chambers. A cold room, where I placed some dragon tears, a golem trophy, and blue torches to give it a colder look. This one has a shell pattern on the wall. There's also a hot room where I placed stones, circling cores, and circling trophies to give the idea of hot stones generating heat. The wall on this one is a sort of dolphin-fish hybrid. Some Roman mosaics inspired me. So in Roman bathhouses there were actually many hot and cold rooms, some with their own baths, hot or cold, and some just for sweating in dry or moist environments. Since I wanted to keep it simple, I only went with one hot room and one cold room. But yeah, other than these rooms, there are 4 corners on each side of the pool where visitors can sit and chat while going in between the chambers. I have to admit the interior of the build is more interesting than the exterior, but since this is supposed to be a secluded, intimate space, I guess it makes sense. So onto the building, there are some curiosities here and there, and some tricks that I came up with as I went. The first step was to choose a layout actually, and the amount of rooms that I wanted to add to it, while keeping it relatively small. The pool had to be the centerpiece, so I needed to dig a whole rectangle deep enough that I could place the vertical beams and still be able to swim on the surface of the water. That made it a bit difficult. I had to dig up several times over until I had the pool deep enough, and that is approximately 4 meters deep. That did require also some def commands and flying on the water to be able to use the pickaxe without swimming, thus removing my pickaxe. The bottom of the pool had to be very flat, so the stone slabs at the bottom were mandatory. That way, when I placed the small beams on it, they would all sit at the same height. To place the stairs going into the pool, I also needed to dig the sides a little bit so that the ground wouldn't show on top of the stairs. Once the box was placed and the surrounding ground fixed to height, I started drawing the shape of the brittle star and the fish at the bottom of the pool with some ashwood small beams. They were all placed with replacement using Shift key. Don't mind the fish swimming around, it was just for test purposes, and it definitely didn't take me ages to remove them. The rest of the area I covered it with small roughs and beams, rotated and placed in such a way that it looked like chipped pieces of mosaic. So after drawing the full floor mosaic, I then filled the bottom again with some more stone slabs, but slightly lower than the beams so that the top sticks out. Once that was done, I decided what areas would go on each side and placed some slabs as indicators for the room areas and some groundstone walls as well, though I did modify the layout several times for many reasons, including roof problems and problems placing the wall mosaics. So these wall mosaics were actually tricky because the wall had to be deep enough to fit the 1 meter slabs, but still make them pop out a little bit towards the front, so it had to be less than 1 meter. I tried using doors and pillars for snapping points, but in the end the best solution was to use a small beam on the edge of the floor and turn it one tick. This way, when I snapped the walls where the drawing would be placed, the beams would be slightly inwards. I filled the back wall and then started drawing the different mosaics of each of the chambers with small beams using pre-placement with Shift key. So as you can see, most of the mosaics are black and white, except one with the fish at the back of the bathhouse, where I used regular beams and damaged them with a sledgehammer to make them green. This is because when beams are damaged, they become green as if rotten with water. For the wave patterns at the entrance, I did use archery targets in a zigzag pattern, so I could place beams around them following their curve. So once the drawings were done, I placed back the original room wall, the one that snaps to the floor tiles. And then I removed the back wall where I was placing the beams. I guess I could have left the back wall, but I figured it was maybe fun to leave the mosaic visible on the outside as well. So I placed an extra wall snapped to the pillar edge and covered the corners with more pillars. Another cool little detail was that I used grouston arch roofs in a way that looks a lot like the Dverger houses in the Ashlands. That did cause a bit of trouble since the corner sides of the pool didn't really match, so I did have to push back the walls on those corners. Also, the roof looked a bit flat on the sides, so what I did was extend them slightly using the help of the grouston pillar snap points. Some other interesting details on the walls on the inside too. Grouston can be actually pretty flat and boring, so to spice up the walls that had no mosaic, I added some beams on the lower part. And for that I used the door on the side of the walls to make extra snapping points on the inner side and then snapping the ashwood beams on that. This way adds a little bit more depth to the otherwise flat walls. The pillars on the interior were extended a little bit as well, and I overlapped a thick beam into a thick pillar to get the snap points to place the extra small slab above it. That way they look a bit more finished on the top part. On those upper blocks, I placed item stands with bronze bucklers. And as for the lower part, I also snapped the beam into a pillar, but slightly lower. As for the interior decoration, well, it was pretty simple, but there was a few tricks that did come into play. For the hot and cold rooms, I placed a hanging brazier at the center and waited for it to run out of coal. Once turned off, I placed item stands on it and then placed either dragon tears or the circling cores and trophies. The bits under them are also a mix of item stands and items like stone piles and single-placed stones. But the funniest part of the build was actually the latrines. The room is slightly small, but I still made it work. I started by placing a black forge and then black forge coolers around the walls, and then placing some grouston walls snapped to a pillar. This way they are half sunken into the ground and only 1 meter of the wall appears on the top. I further split it into smaller square areas and then used free-placed small pillars around the corners of each square hole to make it look rounder. I also added some item stands as lids at the back of each latrine hole. The floor in Roman latrines would sometimes have running water going along the floor next to the latrines, so I lowered the terrain a little bit and placed some grouston thick beams on the sides, using some replacement, and leaving a gap so that the water surface would still shine through. So yeah, a fun build, mostly focused on the interior, with a heavy amount of instances and surprisingly no bathtub. It did take me a while to finish it, but I'm really happy with the end result, and I hope you liked it too. If you did, remember to give it a thumbs up, and as usual, catch you in the next build.